Why did we buy this technology anyway, Mike?
A lot more budget for security tools after the breach. Your business needs.
All right, welcome everyone to our week 2 AMA, or not really week 2, but session 2 AMA. As you know, I'm Mike Almeida. I'm with my business partner and friend, Mark Gibson. I'm the host of our AMA, and today we're going to have a really good conversation, I believe. There's a story that I was reminiscing on with Mark earlier this week, and I figured it'd be a great way to kick off the session. And it took me to a place I was at probably about, I'd say 12 years ago. I worked for a company, and we had a technical challenge. We were looking over some compliance responsibilities. And in the midst of going through that, I recognized an opportunity to streamline certain things. It was very manual in nature. We had a lot of handoffs, and it was verbal through email, walking to somebody's office. And finally, we just said, hey, there's got to be a better way to do this. So we invested a significant amount of money in some technology. And I'd probably say within the first 60 to 90 days after we purchased it and it was in production, a couple of things that I noticed, and more importantly, my leadership noticed, was that the technology was not working the way that we had anticipated it to. And when I started to look across the landscape, there was really low adoption. People weren't using it because it wasn't what they were used to. It wasn't doing what they were expecting it to do. And as a result, we had an increased amount of overhead because not only did we still have to do the responsibility at the end of the day, but now somebody had to run this solution. So not only was it not working the way we're supposed to have it work, we also have a tremendous amount of overhead. It wasn't working consistently, and it seemed like the questions I was getting asked were like, well, isn't this the same thing that this software over here can really do for us? And so at the end of 60 to 90 days, I got asked this one important question, which is what I'm going to ask Mark here. Why did we buy this technology anyway, Mike? That's what they asked me. So, Mark, why did we buy this technology? You ever heard that before?
Yeah. So obviously that's a pretty common question for small business leaders, and really it should be pretty frequent in your organization, whether it's as coming across in the way that you're talking about here in exasperation, right? And we wanted something, we didn't get it, or it's not working correctly, or even as a routine review, right, of your technology stack to understand why you have certain tools in place and how that connects to your business objectives. And generally, you find that there's a disconnect. And what I've observed in the small business space is there's two key factors that come out of why we end up with bloated tech stack or technology that's not really connected to what the business needs. And the first of those is that it's emotion, right? Business leaders tend to respond to incidents and setups in a way that they're required to react. Something happens, it's a very common observation, right, that you have a lot more budget for security tools after the breach than you did before the breach. They provide a little less value at that point. But what you get is a scenario where you have an event, you react to it emotionally as a business leader. The other part is that it comes from having maybe a limited perspective. One of the things you want to have is a process where you're getting feedback from the rest of your organization about how the technology is going to be used, how it might impact your business. And without that perspective, you're making those decisions for how you see it as an individual, right? And so for small businesses in particular, there's a lot of gut feel, instinct. There's not really that overhead, that comes because that's how it's viewed, as overhead. It's slowing me from making a decision. And so, technology decisions are really not any different than other decisions we make in our lives. If you are someone who is, tends to impulse react, that's how you're going to make your tech decisions. If you're a little bit more methodical, that's also how you're going to make your tech decisions. The key is to recognize that your business needs different things maybe than you as the individual. And what are the guardrails that you put in place to help provide, to serve the business versus your own preferences.
Sure. So let's talk about, here's one question that I think people will naturally ask, right? Obviously, when I said, why did I buy this technology anyway, probably is the wrong question to ask. And I think you've sort of alluded to this is people need to change their perspective. How do I ensure I buy the right technology for my business? So what are some thoughts you have on that, Mark? How do you shift the mindset there?
Well, again, first and foremost, I think one of the challenges for small business owners, like I fight this sometimes too, it's is that I am not the business and the business is not me, right? I have to separate those two entities. And when you're very early in your business, it's easy to get those two things, they're not separate, frankly, because you're putting a lot of your own essence into the business itself. And then as it begins to grow and mature, that's when it starts to separate, right? And so if you start to just look at these decisions in that way, that you're buying it based on what another entity needs as opposed to what I need, then you start to separate this idea of saying, hey, am I buying a technology or am I solving a problem for me, the business owner, or am I looking to buy technology to achieve a business objective? And if you do it that way, then you can start to put some edges around the business objective. And again, the business objective should come from more than just your perspective, your thought processes.
So here's a good question, and appreciate these questions. If you have questions for Mark about this, please put it in the chat so we can address it here live. But to what you just said, there's this thought about, it looks like leadership bias. How does leadership bias impact the technology decision-making process?
Pretty significantly, right? I mean, again, the owner by default retains a pretty significant level of influence over buying decisions. Sometimes that's because of budget. Sometimes it's because it's just the loudest voice in the room. And what I would say is that it's very important that you have somebody in your organization that can sort of be your cross-check. Somebody who can tell you no. And even if it's not the final say, of the decision, it's somebody who can make you stop and think and say, do I need to look at this from a different lens? If you don't have somebody in your, sort of orbit or inner circle that will do that, you will always be doing things from just your perspective. And that's where it will lead to this technology decision, that's going to be just about how you see the world.
It's very insightful. And gosh, I can think of times where when you're in that role, you see the nice shiny thing, the promises of grandeur that this is going to solve all your problems. It's easy to fall prey to those thoughts. But something you said here, it really piqued a thought. And I'm going to read this question out. How can a business leader dilute his or her influence over the decision-making process? I heard you start to go into that, but perhaps you can give a little bit more tailored answer to that thought process.
Well, one, it's about, again, we talked about the idea of self-awareness, kind of understanding who are you as a decision maker in general, business, personal, technology, whatever, right? Am I a part of the profile that reacts, that does, makes decisions based on how I'm feeling in the moment, versus a bit more methodical and structured decision maker who likes to gather, information and details and maybe even lends themselves to overthinking a little bit, that kind of thing. You're on the spectrum, I guess we'd say, of somewhere on either of those two extremes. So understanding how you make decisions is going to influence a lot of how you then put those protections, I guess I'll call them, processes in place around you to say, how do we come out with a balanced decision that's about the business and not just about me and my perspective? So, it could be something as simple as, you don't want to over structure this process. You don't want to have more overhead than is required for the size of the decision, or the risk that you're investing into the technology or whatnot. But is there enough of a flow that the people who are using the technology, are they going to be able to, provide thoughts on any changes you might make, features they need? It's basically developing business requirements, right? Um, is there some clarity around understanding the particular problem that you're solving, or might not even be solving a problem, it might be unlocking an opportunity within the business, right? But the point is there at least one other person that can help you to make that decision for yourself so that you can um, counter your natural tendencies?
It's funny you say that. As I reflect on the story I started with here, if I really take a step back and look at how I went about doing that, clearly I was making that decision on my own bias, right? I had a responsibility that I had to execute. I probably didn't do a good job of taking other business units, my peers' considerations into or their needs into my consideration. And so when this solution was presented to them, it was clearly obvious to me after the fact that they truly believe that they weren't even a thought in how we made that decision to choose technology, and it created some turmoil. And so I really appreciate you sharing that, because it's I think it's valuable. Like you've got to find ways to you even said, give your leaders opportunities to grow. And speaking of that, here's a question that just came in. What are best practices to help members of your organization get a better understanding of your business objectives or business problems?
The process there, when we were talking about the requirements, right? So connecting that to your objectives, to your business decisions, that's the leadership function, right? To be able to say, again, is it, as we talked about, sort of the sell, do, risk functions in the business. That's the responsibility of your CEO or owner, whatever the title is. But then for them to be able to communicate to the rest of the team, the people who are actually doing the work, that, hey, here's what we need this technology or solution to be able to do. There's two parts that go on the other side of that. One is the idea that you mentioned the adoption piece at the beginning, right? Generally, the adoption is because I don't understand as a user why this is helping me to do my do my job better, or how it can help me perform, at a higher level. Those are things that should be identified in this process that we're talking about. Is how will this impact the workflow for our users? And then the other part of it is that as just as a human being, I tend to think much more favorably about change that I've helped decide or helped to shape than I do a decision that's just been handed to me. So as you're, putting this together, I mean, again, we're not talking about a process that's got to take weeks or months, right? This might be just a couple of conversations that say, hey guys, we're considering this. Here's the problem we're having. This isn't getting it done. Is this maybe a tweak in process? Is it a tweak in technology? Whatever the case might be, because a lot of times the guys on the ground that are doing the work, they know that there's a challenge before you know. They feel that, on a day-to-day basis, and then it rolls up, to show up in numbers or results or however you measure your performance. And so the more quickly you can have those guys, weigh in on, the how they feel their thumb is on the pulse of the business, the more effective this decision is going to be, and the quicker you're going to be able to make it. And so that process really is just about some solicitation of including other people in your decision before you, as the owner, sign off on the PO, put a credit card in, whatever it is your purchasing process is, right? And that part of that plan will know how we're going to help adopt it on the other side as a part of the implementation.
Very good points here. Here's a really good question that just came in. Why can't I, as the leader, be the one to make the ultimate decision about what technology we should buy?
You should be that decision maker to a degree. When we talk about the idea of that decision one-to-one, depends on how big this investment is, right? I mean, if we're talking about $100,000 investment and that's a huge number for your business, I'm actually going to weigh in on that. If we're talking about something that's more about $100 a month subscription, maybe you don't weigh in on that because you've delegated that to, the group or the business unit that's using it. But their guardrails also come in the form of a budget. So the answer isn't so much that I would recommend to you that you shouldn't be the one making the decision. I would simply say that your decision should include other people's perspectives. And that's what we're talking about here, is the idea of having a process that takes feedback from more than just your own viewpoint.
Very good points there. So in speaking of that, I think one of the things that you just brought up, and again, this is a great follow-up question, talking about trust, right? It requires some level of trust. The question is, how can leaders develop a better trust the team mindset when it comes to making these decisions?
Obviously, that's something that's going to be developed over time, right? It doesn't come with in this necessarily this decision process. There's probably a whole nother conversation around developing trust and faith within your team. But I think if the goal is really for you to feel comfortable that the team, the person you're delegating to, that they have a good understanding of the direction that you are putting out for them. Like, where are we heading, as an organization or as a team? The role of the leader is to be able to define that. And if you define that and have communicated it well, you're going to feel like they're going to make those decisions that are in your best interest. My experience has been, or my observations as well, and again, some of this is personal as well as anecdotal, is that I don't want to delegate that decision because I'm not comfortable in what the outcome might be. And again, that's usually because I've sensed some disconnect. You, as a member of the team, I don't feel are going to make the same decision that I am. And that's generally that there's a lack of cohesion in sort of the approach. The agenda is not necessarily the same, right? Obviously, the individual is going to have a different perspective than maybe the person who's looking at it across the entire business. But this is about how you blend those perspectives and then be able to hand off that criteria to somebody else to be able to make those decisions.
Okay. Awesome. Here's another question for you, Mark. I'm rapid firing these. These are really good. What are some ways business owners can determine if they have truly diluted their influence over decisions or continue to allow their bias to influence the outcomes?
There's probably not a good way to do that without someone else's perspective, right? You're never going to probably get there on your own. I'd say it's probably goes back to what we're talking about, this idea of having a cross check, right? Somebody on your team, whether that's some type of internal senior, somebody who's been with you for a long time, employee. It might be that you work with, an advisor, whatever that relationship might look like. Somebody needs to be able to, like I said, sort of just give you this aha that says, hey, think about this a slightly different way. And if you're doing that, that's when you'll be able to have a good sense that it's blended. Again, you as the leader are going to be responsible for everything that happens in your organization. That does not mean that you have to do everything that happens in your organization. So some of this is about how you scale as well.
If you had to talk to your former self before you got started in business, what are some of the things you would have had better insight on before making technology decisions?
Again, I think I probably wouldn't separate it for just technology decisions. I'd say decisions in general, right? I'm a big fan of just sort of this concept of know thyself. Being able to understand first and foremost about yourself and how you operate, so that you can then clearly interact well with the people who are around you that are helping you or not. But I think, and this comes through in a lot of how I think about most everything, is the idea that as the leader, your first and primary responsibility is always to define and communicate sort of your direction, your vision, your strategy, whatever sort of label you want to use for that. But at the end of the day, it's, that's what you are trying to communicate to your team so that they can, make the consistent decisions that everybody's sort of rowing in the same direction at that point. So having said that, that's what I would go back and kind of tell myself is figure out the best way to do that. Get clarity for you so that you can then provide clarity for them.
Well said. And I think we got time for one more question, which I'm going to show this one on the stream. I think it's a good one. How do we decide technology?
How do we get, if we can't get a consensus? That's a fair question. So I would tell you, this is where, it depends on how big your team is, but at the end of the day, there is a final decision maker. That final decision maker is the leader of the organization. And again, it could be however you set up your hierarchy. You as the leader, Mike, you and I are going through some projects right now where I've said, hey, you are the final, you have the delegate. So if you and I disagree, even in those situations, I'm deferring to you because again, I'm saying you have a better sense of what we might need, or you're doing the work, whatever. It's your responsibility to deliver the results. I can't tell you what tools you should have within reason, right? So we've sort of set some ground rules. So at the end of the day, consensus is not necessary. And I don't think I want to clean that up if that's the message that's come across, is that it's not about consensus. It's about a single decision that involves multiple people's perspective.
Very good. No, I really appreciate that. So, Mark, in the couple of minutes that we have left here, obviously this seems to be a very, I'm not going to call it touchy topic, but it was a very involved topic based on all the questions we had.
Well, it's a charged topic. It comes up often, right? I mean, at the end of the day, it's you as a leader are providing these tools for the team to do the things that and if you're in an organization where you're holding people accountable for that, they're going to feel it. Hey, I need you to deliver X. Well, I don't have the right technology for that. You want to identify that as quickly as possible.
That's right. So in the last, this question will come from me, really, for the audience as a whole, to anybody who's watching this now or anybody who watched the recording. If we have a business owner who has made a decision that they need to purchase or leverage some level of technology, what are some actionable steps you would give someone listening to this before they start going on that journey that they can take away from this AMA and move through it pretty seamlessly?
I'll go back to probably just the two things. One, identify your trusted person. Identify the person that you respect their opinion enough about A, what you're doing as a business, and then B, their decision making as well about how they would integrate technology or whatever. So identify that person so that they can participate in the process. And in the process, just, sort of define, again, it doesn't have to be super formal. Define a quick 3-4 steps of a process that says, hey, we've identified a problem. We want to do some evaluation. We want to get our business requirements, and then we want to make a decision. And, of course, leading back to the consensus question, we want to make sure we identify who's going to be making that final choice as a part of that process. So I think those are really the quick, simple things you can do probably tomorrow. That it's just about exercising the muscles within your organization, getting the reps of doing that, getting used to the idea that's how you'll make those decisions. And from that, you'll be able to iterate your own process. Because you'll stub your toe in a couple places as you go.
Excellent. Well, Mark, as always, I appreciate this. I thought it was very, very insightful today. So thank you for your time and for providing great value. And for those in the audience, I'm going to put a note in the chat. If you would like a copy of this recording or you'd like to know when we're hosting future AMAs, you can send an email to ama@d3tech.com and we'll make sure you're on that notification schedule. Any great pieces of feedback or tidbits or how you applied something you learned from today's call. So Mark, thanks again for your time. Everybody, have a great weekend. Take care.
All right. Thanks.